I came home to a quiet house and the smell of cold perfume. In the bedroom, she stood with her back to me, the closet yawning like a mouth a suitcase open on the bed. She moved with a care I had not seen in months, selecting pieces I never knew she owned, sequined bodysuit lace mask, tiny heels wrapped in tissue. A pharmacy bag slid out. Next, pills, a foil pack, a small blue bottle that promised stamina and forgetfulness. She checked her phone, smiled at a message I didn't need to read, and folded a silk slip the color of a bruise. I watched from the gap in the door, the carpet soft under my shoes, my pulse loud enough to be a doorbell. I did not speak. I took out my phone and held it steady, framing her careful hands, the lipstick she traced along the zipper, the way she hid her ring in the coin pocket of her jeans. I filmed the suitcase as it filled with the life I never shared, and something inside me went still like a lake in winter. Rage pressed against my ribs, but the stillness held. I walked to the hallway, opened the linen closet, and set the phone on a shelf to catch her exit, my breath a thin wire. I understood then that shouting would feed her story and starve mine. Proof would do the speaking. The door clicked. The plan began. How do you answer betrayal without raising your voice? I used to think the signs were only shadows of my own fears, the kind of doubts that come late at night when you are too tired to trust your own eyes. It started with small things, the kinds of details a person can brush aside. She came home late more often, slipping her shoes off quietly as if the floor might scold her, whispering that traffic had been unbearable or that the meeting dragged longer than expected. She never smelled like work, though. She smelled of citrus cologne that was not hers and the faint trace of wine that never crossed our table. I told myself I was being foolish. I remember the first time I stayed up waiting for her with dinner laid out, candles trembling as the hours passed. By the time she came through the door, the food was cold, the wax melted into rivers. She looked at the table, at me sitting there, with hope like a bruise, and said she was not hungry. She kissed the air near my cheek, not touching me, and went to shower. I scraped the plates into the trash, the scrape of fork against porcelain sounding like a verdict. That plate became my secret emblem, the emptiness of our marriage, sitting heavy in the sink. There were other signs. She stopped laughing at the television shows we once shared, her face blank where it used to be alive. She spent more time on her phone, shielding the screen when I entered the room. I once caught the reflection of a message glowing across her glasses. My name was not in it. Her excuses were smooth, rehearsed, as if she practiced them in the car before stepping inside. She told me I was imagining things, that work demanded more of her, that she was exhausted and needed space. Space became her favorite word, as though I were a wall pressing her into a corner. The distance grew each week. She slept with her back to me, shoulders stiff, the warmth of her body turned toward the edge of the mattress. I reached out once in the dark, brushing her arm, and she pulled away as if my touch had burned. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the fan clicking like a metronome, counting down the seconds of our unraveling. When my father fell ill, I needed her most. I sat by his hospital bed, holding his hand as machines hummed. I called her, asked if she could stop by after work just for a moment, but she never came. The office is drowning me, she said, her voice sharp, clipped, as though my father's weakness were an inconvenience. I fed him broth alone, wiped his lips, listened to his stories as he drifted between sleep and memory. She never met my eyes when I returned home late at night. She only asked if I had picked up milk. I told myself she was under stress, that she had burdens I could not see. But the truth was simpler. She had already left me in her heart, even as her body still walked these rooms. The loneliness was heavier than anger then. I cooked meals she never touched, lined up pills on the counter she never thanked me for reminding her to take. I folded laundry for us both, slid her blouses into hangers while the scent of someone else clung to the fabric. I began to notice the lipstick shades she wore were darker, bolder colors she never chose for me. She painted herself for another audience. At night, she lingered in the mirror, twisting her hair, applying perfume at her throat, though she said she was only reading in the living room. Once I found a receipt in her coat pocket from a restaurant across town, the kind with low lights and tables set for two. I asked her casually, and she smiled with a tilt of her head that felt like a knife. It was a team dinner. "Why are you so suspicious?" she said, as if suspicion were a crime worse than betrayal. The guilt was mine, not hers, or so she wanted me to believe. I swallowed my doubts, stacked them like stones in my chest. Each denial she offered made me doubt myself more, like I had imagined the scent of another man on her skin, the phantom taste of wine she had not shared. Even her mother played a part in the deception, calling me weak for questioning, praising her daughter's hard work and ambition, reminding me how lucky I was to have her. I hung up the phone that night and stared at the empty plate on the table, a plate I had set for her, food still steaming, waiting. I realized I had been invisible for months, perhaps years. She did not want my company, my meals, my loyalty, or even my grief when my father struggled for breath. She wanted freedom without consequence, indulgence without guilt. She wanted me blind. The emptiness of the marriage grew louder than any argument could. There were no fights, only silence, the kind that settles over a room like ash after a fire. We moved around each other like strangers, sharing space but not lives. I found myself eating alone in diners, the clatter of dishes and voices around me a comfort compared to the quiet of our house. I drove the long way home, delaying the moment of stepping inside a place that no longer felt like mine. Sometimes I sat in the car outside, engine off, watching the lights through the windows, wondering what awaited me behind those curtains. I still tried, though. I brought home flowers, once tulips in her favorite shade of yellow. She looked at them and said nothing, left them on the counter until the petals drooped water, turning cloudy in the vase. I threw them away myself, their withered stems scratching my palms like accusations. That was when I stopped offering pieces of myself. The signs were everywhere, yet I clung to the hope that marriage could survive on memory alone. I remembered the early years, her laughter bright, her head resting on my shoulder as we planned futures. But the woman standing in our home now was not the woman I had married. She had built another life inside the shell of this one, a secret room where I was not invited. I told myself I was too tired to confront it, that I needed to keep the peace, that exposing the truth might shatter what little remained. But deep down, I knew peace was already gone. All that remained was a hollow ritual, a ghost of partnership. The untouched dinner plate stayed in my mind, a silent witness to all I had lost. It was not just about food wasted. It was about love, unreceived care, unreturned loyalty, disregarded. That plate was the measure of my invisibility, the proof that I no longer mattered in her world. I began to wonder if I ever truly had. I sat in the car long after the street grew silent, my hands on the wheel, though the engine was cold. The windows of the house glowed faintly, curtains drawn a shape moving behind them that could have been her or could have been a shadow. I did not want to go inside. The air in the car was thick, stale, with the scent of my own breath, but it felt easier than breathing the silence waiting in the rooms beyond that door. I thought about the last time she had looked at me without contempt. I could not remember. The more I searched, the more I realized I was trying to locate a moment that might not exist anymore. A question pressed against me in that stillness: when did I stop existing for her? It was not one day, not one argument, but a slow erasure, like rain washing chalk from a sidewalk until no trace remained. The house loomed in front of me, but it might as well have been a stranger's. I remembered the dinners I had cooked and scraped into the trash, the untouched plate always waiting like a silent witness. That plate had become a mirror showing me the shape of absence, the empty seat across from me more real than her presence. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes, and the quiet felt almost alive. It pressed against my chest, heavy and certain, telling me that I was alone, even while she slept only yards away. In that pause, I realized I was not mourning a marriage that still lived. I was mourning a ghost. The night was so still I could hear the ticking of the cooling engine, each sound a reminder that time was moving, even if I was not. I thought about walking away, then leaving the car, the house, the history, but my body would not move. I stayed where I was, in that limbo between leaving and enduring, my heart suspended on the edge of decision. The silence of that night carved itself into me, a scar that would not show on skin but would always remain. The next morning, she moved around the kitchen as if the night had not happened. Her voice clipped, her smile hollow, speaking about work schedules and errands with the precision of someone reciting lines. She said she had to attend a training out of town, only 2 days, nothing unusual. Her eyes did not linger on mine. I asked which hotel just to know where to call in case of an emergency. She laughed softly, shaking her head as if I had told a childish joke. You don't need every detail, she said, sliding her phone into her pocket, the screen still lit with a name I didn't recognize. The sound of her dismissal clung to me more than the words. Later that afternoon, while folding laundry, I noticed the email she had left open on the tablet. A travel confirmation flight booked under her maiden name, the same one she used when she wanted to keep things separate. The address of the hotel burned into me, a place known for its weekend packages, not its corporate seminars. I closed the tablet carefully, not erasing the evidence, but storing it inside myself, each piece of proof like a stone added to a wall I was building silently. When I confronted her gently that evening, asking if she had all she needed for the trip, she looked at me with narrowed eyes, suspicion turning back toward me as if I were the one concealing something. She told me to stop being insecure, that my paranoia was suffocating her. Her mother called not long after, her voice sharp through the receiver, warning me to give her daughter space, praising her for her ambition and hard work. I listened silent to the chorus of dismissal, knowing none of them saw the truth because they did not want to. That night I cooked again, habit more than hope, and when she brushed past the table without sitting down, I carried the plate to the trash. The scrape of fork against porcelain was louder than any argument. Louder than her silence, louder than the hollow reassurances she repeated whenever I dared to question. I realized she had perfected the art of gaslighting, making me doubt my own senses, twisting her lies into truths I was expected to accept. I stood by the sink, watching the water swirl down the drain, and I thought of how many dinners had ended the same way, meals meant for two swallowed instead by silence. The plate in my hand felt heavier than its porcelain weight, as though it carried every night of rejection, every unanswered call, every moment I had been invisible. I set it down gently, not to break it, but to remember. It was the only witness I had left until I decided to gather more. I waited for her to slip, but I did not have to wait long. The suitcase appeared 2 nights later, laid open on the bed like an altar to the life she had chosen without me. I kept my breathing steady, my movements quiet, the phone in my hand a silent accomplice. I filmed the contents carefully, frame by frame, the costumes folded into neat piles, the small bottles rattling in their packages, the box of rubber tucked beside lingerie she had never worn for me. She hummed to herself an unfamiliar melody and checked her reflection in the mirror. She adjusted her blouse, tilting her head with a smile I had not seen in years, a smile reserved for someone else. She zipped the case, locked it, and wheeled it toward the door. The camera caught it all, her careless joy, her secret spilling out like perfume. My heart was a clenched fist, but my face remained stone. The next day, she kissed my cheek with lips that tasted of lies and told me she would be unreachable at the seminar. I nodded, hiding the knowledge in my chest. When the door closed behind her, I opened the computer and downloaded the footage. I trimmed nothing, left every damning second intact. I composed an anonymous email and attached the video. The recipient was easy to find. His wife's name surfaced in the background of social media photographs, her address only a search away. I did not write any message beyond the evidence itself. Words were unnecessary. Truth spoke for itself. As the files transferred, I felt something inside me uncoil, not peace but purpose. I packed the suitcase she had left behind, the one she did not intend for me to touch. Inside, I placed her things exactly as she had arranged them, careful not to disturb the order. It was not mine to interpret. It was hers, her confession wrapped in fabric and foil. I lifted it into the trunk of my car, the weight less than the burden it represented. Driving to their house was surreal. The streets blurred past familiar landmarks, losing meaning. I parked a short distance away, watching the glow of their porch light the outline of curtains drawn against the night. My hands gripped the steering wheel, not from nerves but from resolve. The video had already reached her inbox. Now the evidence would arrive in person. I carried the suitcase up the path, each step heavy with years of betrayal. I knocked once, a firm sound against the wood, and waited. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman with tired eyes and a sharp gaze. She looked at me, at the suitcase, at the silence I carried. I said nothing. I placed the handle in her hand and let go. She opened the case in the doorway, confusion turning to recognition as the contents unfolded before her. Then she laughed. The sound was sudden, jagged, like glass breaking. It startled me not for its cruelty, but for its clarity. She looked past me down the street where my wife stood, frozen, having followed in her car. My wife's face collapsed, all color draining her lips, trembling as the laugh echoed around her. She tried to speak, but the other woman's laughter swallowed her words. Neighbors stirred, blinds shifted the quiet street, waking to scandal. My wife stumbled forward, reaching for me, her voice breaking into pleas I had never heard before. "Please don't leave me here. Please." She clutched my sleeve, but I pulled away. I had no need to shout, no need to curse. The truth was loud enough. The other man appeared behind his wife, his expression pale, his mouth working without sound. His wife turned to him, laughter still spilling, not with joy, but with a venom that told me she understood everything. She stepped aside, leaving the suitcase open on the threshold, the contents displayed like trophies of deceit. My wife collapsed onto the steps, her hands covering her face, sobbing in a way I had once imagined would move me. But I felt nothing. I watched her crumble under the weight of her own choices, the suitcase a mirror she could not shatter. The man slammed the door, the echo cutting her sobs in half. She was left outside, her belongings scattered, her pride shredded in front of the house she had hoped would hide her. I stood there for a moment, watching the ruin unfold. She lifted her head, eyes red, makeup smeared, whispering apologies that floated into the night air like ashes. But apologies were not enough. They could not rebuild what she had burned. They could not give me back the years stolen, the dinners wasted, the silence that had carved me hollow. I turned away, each step lighter than the last, the night air cool against my face. Behind me, her cries followed, but they no longer touched me. They were the cries of a stranger. For the first time in a long while, I felt the ground steady beneath me. Revenge had not been a shout or a blow. It had been a mirror held up to her sins, and the reflection had broken her more than I ever could. I reached my car, slid into the seat, and closed the door. The silence inside was different now. Not heavy, not suffocating. It was clean, like a room aired out after years of dust. I started the engine and drove away, leaving her kneeling in the street with nothing but her shame and the echo of laughter that would follow her forever. She crawled toward me on the pavement, clutching the hem of my jacket. Her voice cracked into whispers that begged for mercy. The street lamp threw her shadow, long and thin, stretched like something broken. I stood still, not out of pity, but out of finality, watching her face contort into expressions I no longer recognized. The woman I had married was gone, replaced by this figure trembling in the night, undone by her own hunger. I pulled my arm free, and she fell back onto the steps, her suitcase spilling beside her, lace and bottles tumbling onto the concrete for all to see. Neighbors lingered at their windows, some stepping out to catch fragments of the scene, their murmurs carrying like wind. She had wanted attention, adoration, secrecy, cloaked in luxury. Instead, she became a spectacle, kneeling in the open, stripped of the illusions she had wrapped herself in. The other wife stood behind the glass of her door, silent now, her laughter having drained into a cold, victorious stare. The man who had been my wife's lover was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps he hid in the back, perhaps he stood frozen in shame, but his absence was louder than his presence could ever be. My wife looked at me again, eyes wet, mascara bleeding down her cheeks, and she whispered my name as if it could still anchor her. I felt no pull. My silence was the answer, more cutting than any word. I turned and walked down the sidewalk, her pleas dissolving behind me, her sobs scattered by the night air. Each step was deliberate, a march out of the prison she had built around me. For years, I had been the one begging for scraps of her attention, asking her to sit at the table to eat the meal I had cooked to see me. Tonight, the roles reversed. Tonight, she was the one pleading, and I was the one walking away untouched. I drove until the houses blurred into darkness, until the sound of her voice was nothing but memory. I stopped at a small diner on the edge of town, the kind with neon buzzing faintly and booths that smelled of coffee. I sat alone and ordered a meal for myself. The plate arrived, warm steam curling upward, and for the first time in years, I ate without waiting for anyone else. No empty chair across from me, no untouched food scraped into the trash. The fork in my hand felt lighter, the food tasted fuller, each bite a declaration that I no longer lived under her shadow. The symbol that had haunted me, the empty plate, was gone. In its place was this simple act of eating alone, but not lonely. I realized then that my power had never been in exposing her to others. It had been in reclaiming myself. She was left begging in the street, but I had found my seat at the table again, and that was enough. In the days that followed, the story traveled faster than I expected. Whispers passed through our neighborhood carried by curious eyes and loose tongues. I saw them linger on sidewalks, trading fragments of what they had seen: her suitcase spilled under the streetlight, her face streaked with tears, the other woman's laughter slicing through the night. I did not need to defend myself. The truth had already become its own witness. She tried to call me at first, leaving voicemails that cracked with apologies, promises of change, claims that she had been lost and confused. Each one sounded rehearsed, desperate, hollow. I listened once, then deleted them all. She appeared at my father's house one evening, her shoulders drawn inward, but I closed the door gently before she could step inside. I owed her no stage, no chance to rebuild the mask she had shattered herself. The silence I offered her was louder than anger. Word spread to her workplace, to her family, even to the church pews where she had once sat with pride. The image she had cultivated, polished and untouchable, fell apart in the light of what she had done. Friends who had praised her ambition turned away. Invitations stopped. Reputation unraveled faster than I thought possible. I watched from a distance, not gloating, not striking, only witnessing the collapse of the life she had chosen. Meanwhile, I found myself breathing easier. I walked in the park near my father's house, the air sharp with autumn, the leaves crunching beneath my shoes. For the first time in years, I noticed the colors of the trees, the way sunlight moved across the water. The weight on my chest was gone. At night, I cooked meals for myself, small portions, nothing wasted. The plate was no longer a symbol of neglect. It was full, and it was mine. I sat at the table and ate slowly, savoring each bite, not because the food was extraordinary, but because it was chosen, prepared, and received without rejection. That simple act became a quiet celebration of freedom. She wandered the town like a ghost, people telling me she had been seen crying in parking lots, lingering at bus stops, trying to piece together scraps of dignity. I did not chase her, did not confront her again. My victory was not in her ruin, but in the stillness I had reclaimed. I understood then that the loudest triumph is not in shouting someone's sins to the world. It is in stepping back, letting them echo in their own emptiness, while you walk forward into silence that finally feels like peace. I thought revenge would taste sharp, a fire that burned away the years of neglect. Instead, it arrived like cool air, after a storm, steady and quiet. When I left her kneeling in the street, I carried no trophies, only the simple truth that I no longer belonged to her betrayal. The days that followed were not filled with celebration, but with silence, and in that silence I found myself again. I began to rebuild in small ways. I visited my father without the burden of excuses, sat by his side and read aloud from the paper while he dozed. I learned how to cook for one, not as an act of desperation, but as a ritual of care. The kitchen no longer felt like a battlefield. It became a place where I nourished myself, not waited for rejection. Friends I had drifted from called when they heard pieces of the story. Some offered pity, but I did not want pity. What I welcomed was their company, their laughter over coffee, their presence reminding me that life did not end in that doorway. Each step forward was modest but firm. I stopped checking my phone for her messages. I stopped replaying the footage in my mind. I walked more, sometimes aimlessly watching the light change across the horizon, as if the world were gently urging me to move too. The greatest lesson was not about betrayal, but about freedom. I understood that holding on to someone who diminishes you is a form of self-erasure, a slow vanishing. By letting go, I chose to exist fully again. I did not need her suffering to heal me. I needed only to stop standing in the ruins of what we once were. To anyone who carries the weight of secrets and the sting of infidelity, I would say this: you are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to let silence do the speaking. You are allowed to place a full plate before yourself and eat without shame. Healing does not roar, it settles, it steadies, it softens. And sometimes the most profound revenge is not in breaking another, but in refusing to remain broken yourself.